The movie opens with U.S. Army General Dean Hopgood intensely staring at the wall in his office. He then gets up from his seat and runs towards the wall in an attempt to pass through it intangibly. However, his attempt is thwarted rather painfully. We are then introduced to Bob Wilton, a journalist at the Ann Arbor Daily Telegram, who is on his way to meet Gus Lacey, who claims to have special psychic powers that allow him to travel anywhere he wants with just his mind. His story gets crazier as he reveals back in the 80s, he was part of a top-secret unit called Psychic Spies who were trained to kill animals by staring at them. The most gifted in their group was Lynn Cassidy. Everything was going fine for Bob till one of his colleagues suddenly passed away, leading his wife to leave him for his editor because life is too short to waste any chance of true happiness in her belief. The process of revealing was difficult. There were some tears, some tantrums, and some choking each other. But it all ended in Bob slumping on the couch, drinking away his sorrow. In the spring of 2003, Bob decides to fly to the Middle East to report on the Iraq War. This is his way of coping with a broken heart and proving himself to his ex-wife. Bob, however, gets stuck in Kuwait, and in his hotel, he bumps into Skip, who initially claims to be an Arkansas trash can salesman but actually is Lynn. Bob recognizes his name and asks him if he knows Lacey, making Lynn leave immediately upon hearing a familiar name. Bob chases him inside the hotel, only to be startled by Lynn suddenly jumping in front of him. After assuring Bob doesn't work for the enemy, Lynn warms up to him and invites him to have drinks with him. Lynn tells him he is a retired U.S. Army Special Forces operator and was part of a special project called Project Jedi, where the soldiers were trained to develop parapsychological skills like invisibility, remote viewing, and phasing, which meant they could pass through objects to become super soldiers. Lynn also reveals he is leaving for Iraq the next day, and Bob convinces Lynn to take him along. Lynn also notices a doodle Bob had sketched on his notebook and brings out a book written by Bill Django, an Army officer. After falling out of a helicopter in Vietnam in 1972, Django found his newly recruited men unwilling to shoot at a Vietnamese soldier because they didn't want to be the first person to have blood on their hands until the soldier shot Django in the chest. As he passed out, he had a vision of the female Vietnamese soldier who says, "Your gentleness is their strength." The next thing he knows, he wakes up in a hospital with a newfound mission to explore alternative combat tactics inspired by his men's gentleness that he wishes to turn into strength. Django's mission immersed him in New Age movement for 6 years, and in 1980, he returned to Fort Bragg, a military installation, with a confidential report called New Earth Army Manual. He now supported a goatee and a pigtail, and had a tattoo of an all-seeing eye surmounting a pyramid adorning his chest. Django's philosophy catches U.S. Army General Dean Hopgood's attention as working on one's psychic power was a concept he had heard about the Soviet Union indulging in. He prompts a meeting with his superior and tells him about Russians thinking America is doing psychic research, which they are not doing yet, and proposes they start doing one. And soon after, the Army appoints Django the 1st New Earth Army Battalion commander. The unconventional training commences with a special unit which includes dancing, driving with a blindfold on, walking on burning coal, and lots of affirmations. Lynn, also a part of this unit, truly feels happy for the first time in his life. But soon, it all comes crashing down when Larry Hooper, a failed sci-fi writer, is recruited to the Jedi after General Hopgood meets him at a spoon-bending party. Larry and Lynn shared a mutual hate, but Larry hated him more because Lynn was better at his psychic abilities. Once when a senior NATO general had been kidnapped, the Jedi was contacted unofficially to help, and utilizing his powers, Lynn had given a location. Django had never seen a person with such strong psychic abilities, which earned Lynn utmost respect in the form of an eagle feather necklace. In the present, Bob reads the manual as Lynn drives them through a desert. Bob is fascinated by the fact that the manual has nothing written about fighting, and Lynn explains they were an army of peace, not war, but then proceeds to show off a simple-looking object and uses it on Bob to hurt him in the most ruthless manner, making him scream. They spend the night sleeping in the car, and Lynn again makes Bob scream when he can't seem to find Lynn early in the morning, only to find him on the car roof performing salute to the sun. They continue their drive, but soon come to a halt when Lynn rams the car on a boulder, forcing them to take a lift, but they soon realize they are kidnapped by the terrorists and are locked up in a bunker. There Lynn reveals to Bob that he lied about being retired, and, in fact, he has been reactivated and is on a secret Black Op mission. Seeing Bob panic, Lynn teaches him about one's destiny and shows him the all-seeing eye surmounting a pyramid tattoo or the symbol of the Jedi on his chest, similar to what Bob was once doodling from his imagination. Lynn suspects the men who kidnapped them are not terrorists, but criminals who intend to sell them to the insurgents. The two are transported to the place of exchange, but a shootout occurs, and Lynn is able to rescue Bob and a third hostage, Mahmoud Dash. The three are later rescued by a private security detail, but as luck would have it, they get stuck in a crossfire between two private security forces. Dash offers to take Lynn and Bob to his house, which is nearby, and they make their way amidst the dancing bullets. When they arrive at his house, they are taken aback by its condition. It had been robbed and fired at, making Dash's wife flee. At night, Lynn can't stop himself from thinking about the part Larry had played in the destruction of the New Earth Army. Lynn and Larry had very opposing views of the New Earth's philosophy, which led to Larry leading an unauthorized experiment to compete with Lynn. He had been doing some research on the use of LSD, which he believed could enhance his psychic powers. To try them on, he used a newly recruited soldier as his lab rat and administered the stimulant, but it failed miserably, and the soldier ended up killing himself. Django was forced out of the army after receiving a dishonorable discharge. The next day, Dash lends Lynn and Bob his car and sends them off. In the desert, they are stuck in a conjunction where the road splits into two. Lynn uses his intuition and goes right, only to get their car blown by an improvised explosive device. As they wander in the desert, Bob gets anxious because Lynn doesn't have a precise location, and he gets even more stressed when Lynn reveals the mission was given to him by Django, who appeared before him in the form of a projection 2 months ago. At night, Lynn declares he has lost his power because of a curse and reveals that Larry and their new commander Holtz forced him to stop the heart of a goat. At first, he thought he'd just pretend to try and make it seem as it didn't work, but somewhere deep down inside he wanted to see if he could do it, and once he started staring at the goat, he couldn't stop and ended up stopping its heart. After its success, Lynn felt guilty and believed he brought a curse upon all of them by harming an innocent creature. Having had enough, he quit, but before he could leave, Larry gave Lynn a dim mac or a death touch on his forehead. Bob wakes up in the morning to see a goat before him that leads him to a source of water. He quickly wakes up Lynn, and they both quench their thirst after spending more than 24 hours in the desert. Soon a helicopter hovers over them and rescues them. Lynn wakes up and finds himself in a hospital facility at a camp. He sees someone and rushes out to chase the man. Meanwhile, Bob is also up and follows Lynn. They walk into a barn with a herd of goats, and in the corner stands Django. Lynn greets him and introduces Bob. It soon comes to light that they were rescued by SICK, a private research firm who are involved in psychic and psychological experiments on a herd of goats. To Lynn's chagrin, Larry runs the facility and has employed Django, who is now a depressed alcoholic. Lynn walks around the firm and discovers its dark side. Saddened by how things have turned out to be, Lynn is ready to give up and gives Bob the eagle feather he wore all this time and asks him to give it back to Django. He also confesses that he is not dying of dim mak but cancer. Bob goes to meet Django, where Django reveals that the feather was a fake from a turkey, with its tip dyed. He also admits everything he said was also made up. Not willing to give up, Bob tries convincing Django not to give up and talks about redemption. Filled with new energy, Django shows Bob how he can control his powers, and during their session, Django gets an idea. They visit the convenience store to get something. Meanwhile, Larry offers Lynn to come back and work for them just like old days and gives him till the next morning to make the decision. The following day, Lynn joins Bob and Django for breakfast, where Bob asks him not to have eggs as they have added LSD to them, and also the water, which Django reveals later. Suddenly everybody at the firm starts behaving erratically. In an attempt to remove the curse, Lynn rushes to the barn and frees all the goats while Django and Bob free the people held captive. As they are doing so, Larry suddenly appears in front of them, pointing his gun at them. Lynn asks him to put the gun down, to which he complies and puts its nozzle in his mouth. Everybody gasps, but Larry thinks he is really hungry, so he's putting things in his mouth and runs to the convenience store to get something to eat. After setting everybody free, Lynn and Django take off in a helicopter, and Lynn gives Bob a mission to tell everybody what he witnessed. They were never seen again. When Bob returned, he wrote the story and told everything he had seen. He sent the story to the newspapers and the TV stations, but to his dismay, they only aired a portion of the story, which revealed the dark side, where the captives were forced to listen to the Barney and Friends theme song for 24 hours, which left the story to become a mockery. Understanding the value of Jedi and how the world needs it, Bob is not willing to give up and decides to exercise his own psychic abilities, and after concentrating on a wall at his office, Bob runs towards it and passes through this solid wall, making us believe that everything that happened might have been real.